Don't just
mindset because I have come to the age where I don't have a whole lot of time left. As I tell young pastors, right now I am on the off ramp, and so whatever I do, it has to add up because I don't have much time to start over. And so I am not interested to spend all this time and effort to come here just to go back because, well, I've done that and there's no kind of appreciable improvement in where we are. All right, I've looked past that. So what I'm sharing here with you this weekend is really designed to give you practical tools and to show you how we can do things a little better. And so one of the and this is a scenario, so I'm gonna read it for you. So this is your exam, and I'm giving you the exam questions after the next slide in that, and then we go back to the lesson. All right. So I'm gonna let me read. So this is a scenario that has embedded in it some of the principles that we'll be covering this afternoon, some that we've covered this morning. So Lydia is a 24-year-old SDA medical intern who has just moved to Agapeville to begin her internship. She finds a church where the people appear friendly. However, it took a while for her to make friends. Her family, brother and sister Francis, along with their 3 children, Amos, 22, Shelley, 20, and Portia, 11. Lydia eventually warmed up to them. It became easy to discuss most things with Mrs. Francis and even Shelley, but finds it difficult to do so with Amos. All right, Portia could be nice and loving at times, but once she does not get what she wants, it's a different story. Her mom says she does not know what to do with her. Mr. Francis, on the other hand, is a steady guy. He provides for his family and is very versed in the Bible and politics. Even though they have been married for 24 years, Mrs. Francis confides that it is a struggle, yet he would boast that they have a good relationship. All right, so that's the scenario that we're going to relate to when we would have gone through the discussion. This is something that's fictitious. And so we're going to come back to that when we would have dealt with some of the other stuff and lift out some of these principles. So you will be required to identify those principles in that scenario, because that's how, in my view, you would crystallize the applicability and the practicality of what we are doing. So this is not just an exercise for information sharing this afternoon. It's really designed to be interactive. So now you have that there. Let's go back. Let's go back to the slide we stopped at this morning. All right. Sorry to put you through all of that. Now we haven't. Let me just bow. Let's bow for prayer. Gracious Father, the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts, oh God, resonate with you, and may you not just open up our minds, but our hearts, oh God, to the possibilities that you're sharing here with us. Thank you for this congregation. Thank you for those who have come back this afternoon, because it's an indication that they want to know and to do. Lord, disappoint them not in this regard. Be with those who are on their way, and may you bring them safely. And even those who are not here, Lord, may it be that those who are here share what we have learned with them and with others. Bless us now. To this end we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, now this morning, just by quick recap, the first thing that we talked about, the first principle, was on the whole area of perception, all right? How we perceive ourselves, how we perceive others, how we perceive our environment would dictate to a very significant degree the filters that we use in our interactions. And it is very, very critical, and this is something that I find does not happen a lot of, where people spend time in quiet reflection. You know, very often we talk about, you know, you must be involved in prayer, but we very often forget that it includes meditation. And meditation is not only directed outwards to God, meditation is also personal reflection in terms of evaluating the kind of person we are. Are we where we're supposed to be in our relationship with God and with others? And so that, if we are willing to do that, and that is something we practice, it goes a long way in not only helping to make ourselves better, but it helps to make us better children, better parents, better spouses and friends and so on. And so, you know, that is something that the Christian needs to practice, you know, to be self-aware. Not that, you know, you are doing it as an end in itself, but the goal is for you to take an honest, introspective look at where you are, the kind of person you are, and see how you need to make changes. Also, in that regard, you must also subject yourself. No, that's a bad word, a bad expression. That you must be willing to have people in your life, you know, give you what we call authentic feedback. You know, sometimes you just sit down, whether it's among the elders, whether it is among, colleagues and so on, and just ask, you know, well, tell me, what do you know, how do you see me? And get folk to, to be real with you. Now, you're not going to ask any and everybody. You're going to be very, very purposeful and make sure that the people who are within your circle would give you, that kind of honesty. So the whole matter of our perception is part of the process, and we want you to, to gear that and bear that in mind. So, having said that, brethren, we want to get some feedback from you. We are not going to insist that you ask questions or that you share. We want you to, feel free to do that. But I just wanted to be able to re-emphasize that first principle this morning about the filters that we use to determine who we are and how we see each other. All right. So, so is there any question from this morning, or you figure you want to advance a bit more? Because listen, you need to talk to me, you know. This morning, because of the Adventist culture, I did not kind of impose on you, because morning service people tend to listen more and give one sentence responses. But this afternoon, it's AY time. The atmosphere is a little more less formal, so I would enjoy you to share. And plus, please understand, because you've just eaten, if you don't talk and be active, then you may fall asleep. And yes. Yes.
Pastor, you got to be careful when you look at your friends for affirmation for doing things, I just look at a good friend of mine, and she starts shaking, hey,
That's shaking her head.
Yeah.
All right. So then you've come to a conclusion based on reality or based on perception?
Perception.
Perception. All right.
Perception. Anyhow, I want to say I appreciate the presentation this morning. I want to ask a question or make a statement in relation to the scenario that you had there. So I guess that's something we could talk about in terms of the appropriate disclosure.
Yes.
So I want to speak about that. This morning was very thought-provoking, especially the statement with the salt. So if we could get that slide so I could ask a question on that slide, if I have permission to ask for that so that I could follow my train
you're
of
referring
thought.
to the sermon this morning, not the sermon. We're talking about the presentation.
Talking about the slide that you began with. The scenario. We're going to talk about that later. Yeah, my question is really concerning the scenario. You said it's going to be interactive, so it really was going to get the interaction going.
We're going to come to that.
We can come to that, but this is this morning. So the conversation I'm having now is about this morning and not this slide.
Okay, so tell me what you had about this morning.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. So the scenario is what I wanted to ask you about, but I wanted to make a statement about this morning while I'm standing.
All right, so let's make the statement about this morning.
About this morning. Okay,
and then we come back to the scenario.
All right, so as I was sharing with you, and I would share in the audience with the rest, the statement about the salt, let your conversation be seasoned with salt. Now, truth is, I've read that text a few times, and I never really paid attention to the seasoning until you spoke this morning, because I am one that believe, my perception is that if it is an apple, it is an apple. And even though we demonstrate love, it still is an apple. And so you need to deliver the flavor of the salt with apple sauce and not pear sauce. So to use the analogy to what you said, when you said being over-seasoned with salt, I thought that being over-seasoned with salt, unlike what you express with flattery, to be over-seasoned with salt would be when you are too aggressive in your communication. In other words, you may have something to say that is valuable, but because you have it seasoned with so much salt with your approach, then the meal is not palatable, and the hearer cannot receive from the communication from which you're trying to establish. I personally had some of those moments in my life where I just shared the meal with as much salt as possible, that I may be the salt of the earth. The downside to that would be when it do not have enough salt, where it is brackish. And so the salt does not change the flavor of the communication. And so when you communicate with the person is no better, even though you add salt, because you did not add enough salt to change the flavor. I see that as flattery and not wanting to upset the friendship. And so you know that you have to share something with them, but you share just enough not to change the flavor, just in case they don't like the taste of the meal. And so you add a little salt, but not enough salt to create change.
All right. Okay, well, thank you very much. And in as much as we still went back to the sermon, because that was not in the slide presentation, but the message this morning, I concur with you. And, an analogy, as you know, it does not have necessarily only one application. So once you can justify and explain the application, then you take it for what it was. And in the message, because it was a moving conversation, I just focus on the simple analogy of too much, too little, and referring to flattery as being too much, and being stingy, as it were, is not too much salt. But I concur with you, and I would incorporate the principle that you've shared with me thus far, and you've widened my horizon, and I thank you for that. All right, very good. Any other? All right, now this afternoon, we're gonna pick up from where we left off. We talked about the whole issue of the perception, and then we now come to the 4 quadrants of self. And remember, this morning we had the analogy that has taught me that the next time I do this, I find somebody who I don't know. The scenario works better with somebody who, because it's more organic. But suffice it to say, as was pointed out, you have those 4 quadrants. They interact, and that is the mechanism. That's the door through which all relationships are developed. And it is very important for you to, to understand and appreciate that, because it has so many implications. And in this particular case, which I'm going to demonstrate in a while, it has implications for what we call appropriate and inappropriate disclosure. And this is one of the most distressing parts I find, especially with individuals and more so with females that have what we call relationship malfunction. A lot of it starts here, all right? So I'm going to go through the scenario. We all know that open self is what you know and what everybody else know about you. The hidden self, that's what you know about yourself that you have not disclosed to others. And then you have the unknown self, that is what you don't know about yourself and don't know exists. And somebody asked me, how is that possible? Then you have the blind self, meaning what people know about you based on their perception or based on things that you may not be aware of, but you are not aware of yourself, all right? Now, one of the notes I want to drop in here that I did not do this morning is that these 4 quadrants, they work on, or they are dominant, or they are very active in 2 aspects of relationships. The hidden self and the open self are very active when the relationships are just forming. And I'm going to demonstrate that in a while. And then the unknown self and more so the blind self are relationships that have already been formed, and they are moving to another level. That's where the unknown self and the blind self come in. So I want you to bear that in mind. Next slide, please. So I'm going to now put this in the form of of a graph. So I've kind of, given them 2 faces. And you see the open self, the OS. Wait a minute. No. The HS, the hidden self, and in the blue, the unknown self. Where's the open self? My eyes are right. The light green is the open self and the hidden self. All right. So I want you to look at that for a minute. So you look at the first graph. It represents basically when 2 people really do not have a relationship. All right? So when they come together, this is how the graph looks. In that there's a small part of the pie that is the open self. So, so there isn't a whole lot in the open self. Right? So that's a relationship about to be formed. All right? The things that are open there may be general things that you know about the person that is publicly available. Okay? But when now they interact, we are dealing with the left side of the graph. The goal of relationships, or the mechanism by which they develop, is where over time, the open self becomes the greater, And naturally, the hidden self becomes what? Smaller. And that is how, a relationship, progresses. So it is very important for there to be disclosure. Because if you have you say you have a relationship with somebody and you don't communicate and you don't share things about yourself, that relationship, either stagnates or it eventually dies. Because anything that does not grow eventually dies. And that's an important principle. Yes, Pastor. All right. They want you to come to the mic.
So you have a person who says, I am private. I'm a private person. But yet you are in a relationship. How does that translate into this?
Well, and that's where the challenge is. In that, somebody who is saying, I'm a private person, that individual, does not express themselves in terms of, disclosure. And so, it's like you want your cake and you eat it. But if you are in a relationship and you are not disclosing, you're not communicating, that relationship is being suffocated. And very often people end up in relationships where they're just, at a standstill. And some of them, just decide to accept things as they are. But what happens is that the quality of that relationship is not fully realized, it's not enjoyed, and eventually it just dissipates. So, you cannot, well, I shouldn't say you cannot, but you ought not to have a relationship and you're interested in a relationship where you keep everything about yourself private. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to disclose everything in that relationship because the person doesn't have to know anything. But what the experts are saying is that if you're under 50% disclosure in terms of what you share about yourself, then that relationship does not really does not grow, and it runs the risk of of suffocating. Yes.
Yeah. Is it possible then that the lack of disclosure or limited disclosure is related to probably past experiences which might have clouded the level of trust, even though it might not have a basis for trust, but going forward, how you look at it?
Precisely. And that is one, thank you very much. And that is one of the reasons why when you hear people come to you and say, look, I don't have luck with relationships and so on, I've been burned too many times. Well, that alone is an indication that, that is something of disclosure that must be addressed. Because one of the things, and I talked about it this morning, is that you have to be willing to be vulnerable. A relationship, a friendship is like a rose. Those roses, they're so beautiful, and they're so inviting, and you want it. But hidden behind those roses, that rose, may be some thorns. And there are people, because they have been stuck so many times, even though the rose is beautiful and they want to desire it, but those scars are preventing them from picking the rose because those negative memories that you have nurtured over the years is what is preventing you. So in a case like that, you now have to do some work on yourself to overcome that. And one of the critical steps is in the area of appropriate disclosure. And let me now go into that. Now, when a relationship, and I was having this conversation earlier with Elder Branca in the office there, with appropriate disclosure, it is one of the most critical keys to the development or the demise of a budding friendship. All right? And so a relationship can either die or grow based on this principle. So therefore, if two people are interacting from the standpoint of the hidden self things about you that you know, that define who you are, that the other person does not know. When you disclose, there's a certain degree of vulnerability that you have to have a tolerance for. But that degree of vulnerability must be of such of what you can tolerate. All right? The other side of that is where people, they throw caution to the wind, and they call what we say, they over disclose. And, you know, disclosing too much too quickly also is a threat to the development of the relationship. All right? And this is a major problem that I have discovered, especially in male-female interactions, in that there is a notion, and correctly so, that to know me is to love me. And so when I see somebody that I am interested in, I would, you know, make whatever advances, and we start to, you know, to disclose. And because you so much want this person to know you and to really get to know the real you, you become so, I don't want to say needy, but you become so enthusiastic about disclosing, you know, sharing about yourself, that you begin to share things about yourself that rather than causing the person to be drawn to you, the release of all that data and personal stuff, even though on your part may think that, okay, look, hey, I am really making myself known to this individual, then instead the individual begins to draw back, because it's as if, hey, look, you know, this is too much information, you know, for me, and so I begin to you know, to pull back, and rather than the relationship growing, it begins to kind of cause the person who is on the receiving end to have too much information, and the person is withdrawing, and you think now that the reason why they are withdrawing is that, look, you know, I need for you to know me more, and so you begin to, the person begins to pull back, and you figure by making more inappropriate disclosure, you think that you're doing something good for the relationship, because, hey, look, I am letting this person know my heart, I'm letting them know how I feel, and you think that that is something positive in your mind, but based on how people are, they are not comfortable with what we call overexposure of your personal hidden self. It must be measured, it must be gauged, and it must be, and please note this, it must be reciprocal. All right? It must be reciprocal in that you have to be willing to gauge when to disclose. And a very good cue of that is that when you disclose and the other person discloses similar information, for example, when let's suppose that I say what my name is, or my name is Ammaran Williams, and they respond, okay, my name is Candace Sproul, then you know that's an appropriate disclosure, because your disclosure is prompting the other person to disclose at a similar level. But when you now find yourself to the point where you're talking about all the stuff in your life, all the personal stuff, and you notice the other person is keeping quiet, and you don't have the cue to realize, but hey, I am sharing my, you know, my personal stuff, and all the person is doing is say, I hear you, yes, and they're not reciprocating. That's a red flag. Are you with me? And so then you may think now that, look, I need to do more, and you find that after that encounter, the person is not keen on, they say, oh, you know, I have an appointment, you know, I have to go by such and such, and they try to cut the conversation up. That's another cue. in the process of the relationship building where inappropriate disclosure is taking place, and rather than helping the relationship, it is actually hurting it. All right? So healthy disclosure is what is reciprocated. I share, I become vulnerable, I take one more step, and then when the person discloses again and is reciprocal, then the relationship is advancing, and you can get a sense at a certain point that, hey, look, we are on the same page, because the person is comfortable to give you appropriately what also they've received from you. And then that's how a relationship is nurtured. And so with male, females, and this is especially for females, one of the things that you have to be conscious of because of your personality, females are more prone to being open in terms of disclosing personal stuff. You need to gauge body language of the male in this case, and to know when is TMI, because once you begin to offload on this individual, then you find that the young man doesn't want to return your calls, and you're wondering, what did I do wrong? Well, that's one of the indicators. Also this afternoon, I was sharing again with the elder, and he was pointing out that sometimes men encourage these disclosure because now they're getting data on you that is personal stuff, and they're now using that to exploit your vulnerability. That also is another indicator. So you would see them saying, okay, tell me more, and they get all that stuff on you, and they get you to the point where you now become an emotional hostage, and they take advantage of that vulnerability and then leave you, there, right? You have to be able to gauge those things, and that is why this principle is so important. Yes, Pastor.
So here's the young man, probably 25, 30, young lady, 28, something like that. Perhaps by week 3, there's a question, so is there any relationships that I need to know about, or that I need to be wary of? And he shares, yes. Should he ask that same question?
Should he ask if there's
her that same question? Or is it the done thing that you don't ask a lady about her previous relationships?
All right, so that's a very a very critical scenario. But in a particular case like that, Pastor, is that if you're saying that the person is asking, do I need to know of a relationship? Well, you have to realize that when you ask a question like that, it's a watershed question that takes you from being what we call the friend or the platonic stage to the emotional. Because once you begin to ask those questions, that's a cue that I want to move the relationship from platonic to something more. And you have to, and so those questions you generally don't ask if you don't get some kind of indicator from the other person that, look, hey, I think that I have a reasonable chance of getting a positive response to a question like that. But the general rule is that, questions like those should only be asked when the relationship has the potential or is on a thin line to cross from platonic to anything other than that. Okay? But those are not questions that you ask individually, because what happens, it becomes an inappropriate disclosure, and once you ask a question, the other person may not be at the stage of even thinking about a friendship other than just a platonic friendship. And when you ask a question like that, then the person begins to pull back and realize that, hey, this is going too far, too fast, and it's not safe. All right? So the rule is that I advise is that don't go there unless there is a 110% chance that the person is there. And you can pick up some nonverbal cues that would tell you when you can go there. For example, if you're talking on the phone and you talk every day and then you miss let's say, an afternoon, you don't call the person. And the person, is calling and say, hey, why are you not calling me? And you can hear the anxiety in their voice. So those are little cues you pick up that, hey, look, there is some dependence here. And if the feeling is mutual, then that's where you're willing to take it to the next level and ask a question like how you would have done that. All right, so that's in terms of how the embryotic development of a relationship goes with the open self and the hidden self. So let's suppose that now we are where a lot is known between the individuals, and that's the greater percentage of that relationship is on the open self. The friendship moves to various levels. And then when now that relationship really becomes mature, and it moves, and it wants to now move to a level that is considered more of not just friendship, but being a confidant, being, I don't want to say soulmate, but I can't think of a better word now, then that's where the other half of the quadrant comes in. And that is the blind self and the hidden self, all right? Now, so the disclosure takes place more on the blind self than on, did I say hidden? The blind self and the unknown self. So somebody was asking this morning, I think it's you, Elder, how do you know if nobody knows, if I don't know? And right, the only time you know that something was in the hidden self about you is that when it comes out and you realize it for the first time, and the person, somebody else, hears or learns about it, it becomes in the open self. An example, let me give you an example quickly and move on. For example, one of the examples I use is the expressions of expletives. There are people who grew up in the church and have a certain vocabulary, and that's how they speak. They don't, certain things you would not get them to say. So it's not part of their quadrant. It's not in their DNA. But let's suppose that something happens where, something happens where the person had or gets some kind of incident where it really hits the person at the unknown level, and without realizing it, an expletive or a four-letter word came out that you never knew was part of your vocabulary. Do you know of that situation? So before that point, you never knew that those kinds of words have become a part of your vocabulary. And so up to that point, you weren't aware that you were capable of expressing those kinds of thoughts. But because of whatever, whether it's anger, whether it's surprise, or anything like that. For example, somebody who can jump over if they're startled to that extent, they can perform certain feats that they never knew they could have done. That's part of the unknown self. So they exist, but you really don't know until they become known. So that's the evidence of the unknown self. All right. So now the blind self, that is where what people are saying about you, how people perceive you, but you're not aware because, we live in a society where people don't want to offend, where they don't want a problem, so they know certain things and they shoo behind your back, and then as they see you come in, they're all quiet. And they change the subject. And that gets you, a little miffed. And so, if you have a friend now who not only mingles with you, follow me now, but they interact with your social circle, and there are times when people have perceptions about you that they would not share with you. But somehow, because, your friend is connected to a friend who has another friend, and you know how that goes. And so word may get to your friend, the one that you have an established relationship with, that you are considered somebody who is, let's say, proud. I'm just using that, So that's the word on the street about you, but you don't know. And then your friend is aware that this is how you are being perceived. This is how, you are, seen. So that's the blind self. And so your friendship would now dictate, should you disclose that blind self, or that thing that is unknown to you, that's blind, that's your blind spot. Should you, as that person's friend, disclose it to them? So, a lot of times, we find individuals who they would have this friend, and they don't want to distress them with information that folk have on the street about you. And so it may, they may make a judgment call that, hey, look, because you're my friend, and because I care about you, I want you to have a clear picture as to how you are being perceived around. So therefore, I am going to come and let you know. Now, if that happens, what do you think is the most likely outcome or reaction to that disclosure that you're making to that friend? All right, and here's where you come in now. So I see we have somebody ready to answer that.
Not to answer that, to ask a question in terms of that blind side, because that is the perception of those who I associate with. But let's say, for example, the friend that also associate with the friends that I associate with, they got that opinion about me, that perception about me. But within myself, I am not that way. I'm not proud, right? How then do I deal with that? The main fact that I don't see that about myself. Should I seek to examine myself closely to see if that is really true, or that is just a bare perception of them, so I have nothing to bother about?
All right.
Because sometimes when people have certain perception of you and come to share it with you, you might get offended because you don't see yourself that way. So how dare you come and tell me I am that way?
All right. Excellent question. And what we're saying is that the disclosure, and I'm using just that as an example, but there are others where they're clear-cut, where you do certain things and you just are not aware. You don't have that emotional intelligence to know that, hey, look, this is what you're doing, because you tend to see yourself in a certain way. All right, so there is that, and there's also the perception. What we're saying, that even with the perception, right, because perception very often becomes reality for people, and we also must be willing to address address perception. But the challenge is to find whether you are in a position to disclose that about your blind self, because very often individuals who are of that, that situation become, they may be grateful that this person has disclosed, and I am now, even though I may not think that that's who I am, but because of this is how I perceive, I need to now do the introspection. We just talked about it this morning, about how we perceive ourselves, and make the adjustment. Now, that would bring you and that individual, who is your established friend, that can help to solidify your relationship and take it to the next level and give the impression to your friend that you made the disclosure to that, hey, we are really confident that you're looking out for my back. That's one particular outcome. The other outcome is the opposite, where your friend that you are disclosing to or sharing from the blind spot may begin to think that, well, the fact that you come to tell me about this, it means that what? That you believe it too. And rather than helping your friendship, it puts a strain on that. So I come back to my question. How do you know when to disclose to your friend about their blind spot? When do you think it's safe? So I need your expert advice. Now. All right? Let me hear it in the mic.
I was just saying, when you observe what the persons are saying for yourself, then you can speak to it. But if you don't observe it, then you shouldn't speak to it.
All right. And what about now if the person hears it on the street, hear from somebody blurt it out, and then they come to you and say, but wait, I heard this thing from such and such that I am XYZ. You ever heard that?
Well, if they open the box, they should be willing to take what you have to say. If they broach the question, then they should be willing to listen to what you have to say, whether it is true or not. But as I said before, if you hear that, okay, let me give you an example. I have a friend that is a pastor, and we get along fairly well, but I have heard another friend of mine said that they don't like this person because of XYZ, but I said, well, I have never seen that in our relationship, so I didn't do anything with it because that's not my experience. So if I had experienced it, then I could speak to it, but I didn't, so I left it there.
All right. Okay, excellent. Anybody else? Yeah. Yes.
Well, Pastor, as you said before, and I want to quote the wise man Solomon, who said, iron sharpens iron, and so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. Friendships and relationships are risky business. And I find that if you understand or a friendship reach a level where you appreciate that I genuinely care, then even though the sharpening process of the iron may be painful, it will not destroy our friendship. And so I think it is safe to approach those things when your friendship is at a stage where iron sharpens iron, and you're willing to take the calculated risk that we have enough foundation, that this person understands that I am serious about our friendship, and we need to get beyond this. This is a perception. This is something that needs to be addressed head on, and we deal with it together as a friend. There is no calculations that you can make for how a person will respond to blind self situations.
All right, excellent. I'm going to come back to that, but just let me throw something in the make it into a monkey wrench. We're not dealing with perception now. Let's suppose that you have this friend that you're now moving the friendship to the next level, so it's not just at the primary stage. And that individual your friend has a serious body odor. Yeah. And many individuals who are in that situation may not be aware, because sometimes body odor doesn't always be self-evident, but known to others. That is keeping it real. So the question is, in a case like that, what do you do if this person is your friend? What is your response? Yes, Elder. We don't want a parable here.
All right,
Yes.
good. I was thinking about my response to the original question, but you kind of helped me in what you just said afterwards. Now, you mentioned earlier about reciprocating. And in a friendship that is balanced and going the right way, I believe there's always evidence of reciprocation. So in a scenario where I am a friend, you and I are friends, and I happen to get information, all right, that you may not know, but as we said, someone has shared it, or people are sharing it. If in our past relationships, I had an experience where you had said to me, what do you think about me? Is there anything about me that that you might not have heard me address, but you think it is significant that I know, right? By doing that to me, you are saying to me, I value
your input.
Yes.
Or your opinion.
Yeah, because I'm willing to give you opportunity.
Right, and you're being
to
vulnerable.
input into me.
Right.
Right. So I'm being vulnerable to you. Right? So if I get that experience for you as my friend, then I am most likely to think that because that is your way of life, that's where you're at, you understand that level of friendship, that you might be more accepting of me now sharing something that might have been said or heard about you, because we have that kind of relationship, that kind of interest, right? So from that perspective, but with regards to the illustration used about the body odor, for example.
All right, hold that, because I want this to sink in, because this is one of the points that I was going to make, to kind of pull things, together. And that is, you must have, in your relationship, you must have a system of evaluating the strength of that relationship, the level at which you operate. And one of the things, the indicators to use is what we call the level of reciprocation. So that must not be underestimated. And basically, you would know, because if I have a friend and they're sharing at a certain level with me, then you know it is safe to share at that level with them as well. Okay, so, that principle of reciprocation is very important, all right? And while I'm on that, the second way of evaluating what you should disclose or not is something that I have practiced. And I have a friend, and I can share, those of you who probably in the church long enough have heard of Roosevelt Daniels. He used to be the evangelist, Caribbean Union. Well, we live about 10 minutes from each other. And we have almost like a father-son relationship. And, we operate at a very, very, deep and personal level. And one of the things that, I admire about him is that one day we had a conversation where he disclosed to me that these are the conditions. If I hear something about you, these are the conditions under which I'll disclose it. He says, if I am aware that this thing is hurting your ministry, I am going to, I am duty bound to disclose it. So we have that understanding. So, just don't take things for granted, but be able to set up basic ground rules. And the other part of that, he says, look, if it is something that is just meant for gossip, that I know, number one, is not true, and it would not in any way affect your ministry, I am not going to tell you. And listen, that meant so much to me, because one of the worst things that can happen is when you have a friend who is very malicious and always want to peddle to you all the unnecessary gossip and so on, and just tie up your head unnecessarily. You know what I'm talking about? And so, they would say, you see that man, he ain't like because you know what he say about me? And now when you do that, you just disturb my peace, because I used to be, even though that brother would be saying hi and so on to me and disclose, and it's fine, even though I may not necessarily care for how he relates to me, because hey, look, some things you better left undone, but that busybody begin to tell you things and just mess with your mind, because as soon as you walk out there, you see the same person, the person peddle on you and say, boy, that person don't like keep away from them, and then it just puts a strain on you. And so we have that understanding. So we decide beforehand what is appropriate to disclose and what not to. All right? So that's the approach that we have taken. I know most men that they prefer it that way. But sometimes, ladies prefer the intuitive part, and sometimes make it a little more difficult for you to navigate those issues. So I just wanted to drop those two approaches in terms of how to nurture and to make sure that disclosure does not hurt your relationship, but it helps it. All right? So let me hear you now respond to the scenario. And maybe now you have the answer, because I cannot drop those in there. Yes?
Well, here's the thing. The illustration, the scenario you put with regards to order, right? It is, the initial question was related to things that people are saying, all right, about this individual that you happen to hear.
Right.
And then you got to decide whether you're going to go and give the individual.
Yeah.
But in a situation like this, if it's an order, the chances are that what others might have picked up, you would have picked up, because you are in their companionship.
Right.
The thing is, oftentimes, is that based on the level of the relationship that you have, or what you think you owe to this individual, you might have been tolerating it. And
you might be what?
Tolerating it.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
Right? Because you value that friendship and you don't want to come across as pushing the person away. So for all this time, you've been tolerating it. But however, the fact that you're hearing that others are talking about it, right? Then it brings to this point where you decide, no, look, all right, I really need to deal with this. But here's how. My thought is this. Similar to the same reciprocation. How if I was to ask you, all right? Now, you're the one with the order, not me. But how if I were to ask you, tell me something. I know we got a really good relationship going, right? For years, we've been really this kind of way. If you had discovered something about me that was obnoxious, you don't have to relate to the issue, but there's something distasteful or obnoxious about me, right? Do you value my friendship enough that you will let me know about it? Asking the kind of question like that gives you a chance to hear him say, look,
you engage in role playing. Yes.
That's right. I love you so much that I will not allow that to go unmentioned, because to do that would be to expose you to further, whatever. And I would want to share it with you. Now, if you tell me so, not that I have to come and say it at the same time, but at least I know that the kind of relationship that you have with me, because of your vulnerability, that I might be in a position to say that, you know what? I've been trying not to mention it because I really value our relationship, right? But there's something about you that I picked up and a few others picked up as well. And I think maybe you might need to work on it or something. I think that is a good way of approaching it. Once you've understood that the person is willing to do the same for you. All right? So that is my input with regard to that.
I can see that you work with the diplomatic corps. Excellent. And, and that again is, as you say, it's a matter of the value that you place on the relationship, because there's some folk, it takes them, into an uncomfortable zone, that people are not comfortable, disclosing those things. But you have to make, a judgment call, whether are you dealing with just preserving the friendship, or it is a matter of principle that you have an obligation to, to your brother. And, these scenarios are not, there's no textbook that give you all the right responses and the wrong ones. You are armed with this kind of, so you're aware of this dynamic. You now have to make the judgment call. And the key is for you to evaluate what value you place on the relationship and where the relationship is in terms of comfort zone, whether you are in the A quadrant or the A half of the quadrant or the B half of the quadrant. But that is the understanding that we use to navigate those kinds of issues about relationship. Yes, my sister.
Right, Pastor, I just because if it's a friend of mine, for me, if I see something negative about my friend, I will go share with them. Like, hi Sam, I really have something to tell you. This is something I observe, and I am bringing it to your attention because sometimes things happen and you don't know. And I will tell her there's a problem.
Right.
And we'll talk about how to address the problem. So I won't beat around the bush and go all around. And if I hear people talking about it, it's even more critical that we address it.
Okay, and what we're saying, the key is, so it's not about whether or not you would address it, it's where the level of the relationship is. You have to make an evaluation as to whether the relationship can survive, not just mere existence, but where it can grow from there. All right? So, so what we are discussing is the approaches, but I'm saying the approaches are secondary to the evaluation that you make as to where the relationship is. Yes, my sister.
Sorry. I just wanted to say there were instances where I saw strangers. I don't have a relationship with them, but something was wrong, and I approached them and they said directly, well, ma'am, sir, whatever the case is. Because it's not right, like other people would see and not say anything, but then they could go and tell that person. Right, so you were talking about, the relationship, but I don't have a relationship with a stranger, but I see something is wrong, and I tell them that something is wrong. So I think it's just a matter of you being a person that, a nice person, or a person that will be encouraging, because it's like, do unto others as you shall have them do unto you. So if something is wrong, if you see that you have an odor or coal is in your eye, because I tend to people find it hard to tell someone that coal is in their eye, right? When 5 people were speaking to them before you, right? And then they'll be like, but you thought you got coal in your eye, no, but I tell you, I normally do that, right? And I don't have, let me say, that close relationship with them. I may just be having a conversation, but to me, it boils down to being a trustworthy person, a person that cares for someone, whether you know them or not.
All right, excellent. And now you've just given us a very important segue to the next principle. So let's move on to the next one. I'm aware of the time. All right, and believe it or not, you've just given us that segue into the next slide, because of the next principle, and that is the emotional content that exists in the relationship. I touched on it this morning, and I quoted from Proverbs chapter 18, a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. Now, when I read this, you know, because you study psychology and you think it's some way out there, and you don't realize that a lot of those principles they have a biblical base. It may not be the purpose of the one who developed the concept, but here the Bible is talking when it says a brother offended means somebody who's close to you. Offended is harder to be won than a strong city. And it has to do with my sister, she left. It has to do with the emotional content in the relationship. All right? And when I say the emotional content in the relationship, is that if you are going to be affected more by what the person is saying to you, you have to be even more careful about what you say to them, because you may say it to somebody who is not connected to you. So in this particular case, where the sister mentioned, but if I see somebody I don't have a relationship with, I can walk up to them and tell them, and that might be an effective method of dealing with them, because, you know, there is no consequence to that disclosure, because the emotional content is not high. And just to illustrate that, I said it this morning about somebody calling a stranger a fool, or a crazy man calling you a fool, is different from your wife calling you a fool. All right? You have a completely different reaction, and that's because the emotional content in your relationship is much higher, and you become more vulnerable. And I remember a couple, just to show you a practical example, I had a friend, and she came to me, one day and said, "Pastor, I don't understand why my husband, he doesn't communicate with me." So I said, "What do you mean by he doesn't communicate?" "No, because we would be driving from home to work, and he is just there, sometimes silent. He may just mention a word, that really doesn't amount to much. In other words, he is so preoccupied from me. And that is distressing. And it's fine if that's how that might be his mood." So she would say, "Okay, well, it's just his mood." But then he gets to the office, and there are pastors and his colleagues in the parking lot. And the same man who had a toothache, who couldn't talk, while you're in the car, as soon as he steps out and he sees his colleagues and so on, and he starts this animated discussion with them, and she is in total shock and bewilderment, because she's saying, "What's wrong with me? In that you were sitting with me in traffic for over an hour, and you hardly said a word, and as soon as you come out there and you see your friends or you see your colleagues, you're all, as a matter of fact, you're the center of attention, and you're talking and talking," and she would get mad. And when he comes home now, she would just lay it off on him. And he said to her, he says, "You see, I can say anything that comes to my mind when I'm around them, because when I'm finished talking to them, even though I may upset them by something I say, I go in my own house. And I don't have to deal with them. But when I say something to you in the car, I'm not only going to hear it in text messages at work, I'm going to hear it, around the dining table. Because it is something that is affecting you, and I know that when I speak to you, it has consequences, not just in you being upset for a little while, but it can affect the relationship. And that is because your reaction or your whole affect has has an impact on my viability in the relationship, because of the emotional content that I have to, have to deal with. And so that is something that must be addressed in terms of how you see, individuals who are connected to you. You have to be, be careful that you do not have, the kind of stress in the relationship. And that is why it is so important, brethren, it's so important for you to develop not just only the emotional side of a relationship, but the friendship side. And I find that this is a major problem within the church, in that we are emotionally, we relate emotionally, right? Because of, the high content. And most of us, when we start our courtship, we start with an emotional relationship rather than a friendship. And so one of the things that we try to do to help to address that for people to be able to speak freely and not have to be hearing a complaint for the next 2 and 3 years is for couples to preferably before you get into a relationship, young people, is to develop a friendship and then an emotional relationship. But if you have already jumped that gun and into an emotional relationship, or you're already married, then you have to now make a decision to grow your friendship part of the of the relationship, and that takes time. All right, and that is why I was sharing this afternoon with some friends that when you look at this span, the lifespan of a marriage, it's between 40 and 50 years. That's the lifespan of a marriage, because based on the Bible's reckoning, most Jews got married between a female between 17 and 20. And then you're expected to live 75 years. So when you do all that calculations, about 50 years, you'll be married. And what God is saying, because of how complicated male and female are, and because of sin, it would take you approximately 50 years to figure out each other. I know that may not sound very comforting, but you have to enjoy the journey. And so when couples come to me, after 5 years of marriage and expect that, their spouse should understand them perfectly, I give them that scenario. I say, my brother, my sister, you have 45 more years to figure it out. You've only crossed 5, so take your time and work according to the timetable that God has given you. And it's during that time you develop that friendship that helps you to overcome the scenario of the emotional content being a problem. All right, next one, because I recognize I want to get through this scenario, so we may kind of hold on to questions for a while. Next slide, please. All right, then the other principle, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is something that's known to us, but I think it's important to drop this in here, and it's related to the principles that we have shared before. And it's called, I'm sure you've heard about hidden agenda. That's the one that we are very familiar with, or you have a hidden agenda. And very often it is used in a negative sense. It's not always something negative. It is, part of the development, the normal and healthy development of a relationship, to have agendas. And we're going to unpack them from it. Yes, my brother.
Pastor, I know you want to move on, but
that's all right.
I'd love you to go back to the next slide,
all right,
and speak about Satan's interests. What's the thought process?
All right, well, emotional content, it is Satan's interest to exploit our vulnerability to each other. As I said, Satan would cause a lot of conflicts, cause a lot of stress in the marriage for us to say things that are uncaring. All right? And what we're saying is that whereas you can get away with that with a colleague and it has no consequence, you must recognize that in a marriage where the emotional content is, Satan knows that if he gets you to say something off the cuff, for that short investment of time he has placed in destroying a relationship. He knows that it's gonna have a whole long period of time for you to retrace that step. And we always, tell couples that, look, before, if you want to react to your spouse in a negative way, go in the bathroom and close the door and talk to yourself and say it there. But once it comes out of your mouth and it goes into that person's ear, it's not just a thought, it becomes a part of our emotion. All right? And when you have somebody who is emotionally affected or emotionally scarred, it colors every single aspect of the relationship. So one of the things that I have learned in over 25 years of marriage is know when to be silent. And I have to bite my tongue because, you want to have your peace and say it. I get in the car and I drive and I cuss out my wife in private. And then when I go home and I get it out of my system now, I am able to, to reframe and to talk it over and get it out of my system, because it is better that way. Because if I say it, brother, I have sometimes, and my wife, she has certain personalities that I prefer to suffer in silence than to open a war with my wife, because I don't ever win. It's just how it was designed by God. All right? So that's where the Satan's interest, and that is critical in that regard. Next one, let's move on. All right? So there are three agendas. There's the open agenda, the hidden agenda, and that's the one that we focus on. But there is the open agenda and there is the automatic agenda. All right? Let's define them. Next one. All right? So this is the definition for an open agenda. Open agendas contain the needs, and this is something, and I'm going to make these presentations available. I'll leave them with the technology folk, and you can get a copy so you can. All right, so the open agenda open agendas contain the needs, feelings, and expectations that you are aware of yourself and convey to others directly. So this is a definition from, forget the name of the book, but the author is I think is Mary Potash. All right, and so I want you to pay attention, because it's very, very specific, and it's something that you need to take a note of. In that an agenda is something that's on your mind that you want to convey. When you have a church board and you have an agenda, it states, okay, look, this is what I'm going to discuss, and these are the strategies, and I want you to know that this is how I'm presenting it. So therefore, people now would react to what you've presented to them. But it's the same thing in a relationship. You have an agenda and you express it. And in this marital relationship or even other relationships, you need to identify what the need is, what feelings or emotions are associated with it, or expectations, and that you make them known. All right, so I want, well, the children in the audience, I was going to use a bedroom language agenda that most of us men have. But let's come back to the PG kind of agenda. So you're saying, I would need for you to wash the car every Friday afternoon, at such and such a time, and so every Friday afternoon is the expectation, and that's what I'm asking you to do, and I want you to do it for me, from this Friday. So that's an agenda that you have. It's open. All right. Now the hidden agenda is hidden agendas are the wishes, hopes, desires, and assumptions that you recognize in yourself, but you choose to conceal or camouflage during your interactions with others. Now, I'm sure you can see the difference. And this is a very critical component in relationship building, where the people do not differentiate between or when and how to use an open agenda or a hidden agenda. All right? Now, the automatic agenda, let's go to the next one, but we're going to come back to this. The automatic agendas comprise of the needs, drives, and emotions and motives that you do not consciously recognize or understand in yourself and are underneath it all. Now, that one is always unhealthy. Believe it or not, the hidden agenda can be healthy. But these automatic agenda is where you kind of you become what we call subversive in terms of the way you relate to one another and the expectations that you have. You almost use it as a tool or as a weapon to get what you want. And at the end of the day, both you, the giver and the recipient, you are unsatisfied, or you have not been satisfied with the automatic agenda. But they go back to the hidden agenda now. Go back to the hidden agenda. There are times, where you have, as I said, wishes, hopes, and assumptions, where ordinarily you would want your, and this happens with most men, and I try when I have these discussions, I don't like to make the division between men and women and so on. But this one, I think is, I have to make this exception, so please, men, forgive me. All right, so the hidden agenda here is where, for us men, we would prefer for you to tell me and to spell out exactly what you want me to do for you. I need for you to spell it out. And when I see it and when I know that you want me to do it, then I am clear, because, men, we can get confused easily, ladies. And so when you tell somebody, I want you to wash the car, you may mean something a little different from what we understand to wash the car, because we are very literal. Women are more symbolic. And so when they tell you to do something, they don't always spell it out. Not that they're being conniving. Most of the time, that is. But they want to give an opportunity to see how you can anticipate what's on their heart. So they will tell you it halfway because they want you to do what? Figure out the rest. Because if they spell it out to you, A, B, C, they are of the opinion that you're only doing it because I asked you to do it. But if you can figure out 50% of it, better yet 100% of that hidden agenda, then they know that you really, really want to do it. Can I get an amen from the ladies? Am I in the wrong place? We need to shut up shop here. And like I said, that is not necessarily a bad thing, because that anticipation of needs in that, because notice it says a hidden agenda are wishes, hopes, desires, and assumptions that you recognize in yourself and choose to conceal or camouflage by a suggestion during your interactions with other people. It happens not only in husband and wife relationships, but it also happens in friendships, where you go and you talk about, boy, things are so rough with me these days, and they cut my pay at at the job, and the children need this and that, and so you listening may think that the person is just sharing, but it could be a hidden agenda that they are throwing out at you, and you have to now make the evaluation as to whether you are just sharing or you are sending a suggestion. Now, as I said, in a perfect world, it is better to have an open agenda, and that makes life simpler. But in terms of deepening relationships, sometimes hidden agendas are good in helping relationships to move from one level to the next. Because when you can anticipate the needs of your spouse, even without them dropping a hint, it does wonders for the relationship. Are you with me? All right, so that's the principle there of that relationship building technique, in that the use of open agendas, that helps when a relationship is in its embryonic stage where it is being repaired. You have to state what your needs and desires are. But as the relationship grows, you now shift, or you begin to shift from open agendas to sometimes hidden agendas, and where the other party anticipates. And when you anticipate correctly and you respond to those needs, it helps to enrich the relationship. But if that does not happen, if that anticipation does not take place, then things begin to go downhill. And that's where you get now automatic agendas. Go to that one. That's where now the expectation becomes very corrupted. And rather than being a technique to nudge the person, it becomes a weapon or a tool to shame and to ride the person with guilt. And so the relationship now descends into, oh boy, if I don't do this now, I have, a problem where, emotional interactions become, so unfortunate in terms of how those automatic agendas, fall out, where the relationship begins to descend. All right, so that's open, hidden, and automatic agenda. Any question? I'm recognizing that time is of the essence. All right. Next slide. We talked about this last evening, and this is all relationships have either one of three orientations. One of three orientations. And when I say orientations, in terms of how they are, how they are expressed, right? And it goes back to perception. It goes back to all of the principles that we've been talking about. And so these three orientations are the I-it orientation, the I-we, and the I-thou orientation. All right? The I-it is fairly self-evident. That is what we call a person-to-object orientation. That is, the relationship is driven by the person-to-object orientation. Then the person-to-group, that is, the person relates to you as part of a group rather than as an individual. So that's the I-we orientation. And then the third one is the I-thou, that is a person-to-person, where they relate to you as a person, not as an object, not as part of a group. All right? And so an example of a person-to-object relationship is where I relate to you, not because I like you, not because I think that you're a good person, but you have something that I want. And I'm going to be the perfect friend to you because I am seeing my friendship with you as a means to that end, that objective. So if and I'm gonna be real, if a man sees a woman that he is sexually attracted to, and that he wants, to move in that direction with you, but he's not really interested in you as a person, but just that desire for sex only is the object. So he relates to you in that regard, and sometimes if you're not careful, you think that he's relating to you in the whole, as a whole, but he has that objective. And then once it is satisfied, then what happens? The relationship is not what it used to be because the objective has been satisfied. Another example, children. In that I may want, what's the latest gadget these days? When I was growing up, it was a Nikes, shoe. Let's suppose that, I wanted to, as a child, get a Nikes shoe from my parents. And ordinarily, I'm an obnoxious, good-for-nothing child. And, but I want this sneakers, and the only person who I can get it from is my mother. And so you begin to be, the model child. And you're very obedient, and your mother is so impressed that the Lord has worked a miracle, on this child's heart because now he's a perfect child. And he is doing all that because he has an objective in mind. And so he's nice. And so when he figures that he has everything covered, then he makes his claim. And the mother says, well, I really don't have the money, but you have been such a nice child, and you are so changed that I'm going to make this sacrifice and borrow the $300 or whatever it is and buy the Nike shoes for you. And as soon as he gets it, what happens? Right back. That's a person to object orientation. All right, the person to group orientation is where I only relate to you because you are a member of the group. Classic case in point. We don't have to go far for that. You're a member of the church. And so I greet you, I hug you, I do all these nice things with you, because you're a member of the holders assembly in the church. You're my brother, you're my sister. But something happens where you fall out of grace. And you're excommunicated. And so at the corner, I see you now. And because now you're no longer a member of the church, I begin to treat you at arm's distance because you are no longer a member of the church. You're no longer a member of the group. So therefore, I don't have to, relate to you because of the fact that you're no longer part of the fellowship. And that happens a lot within the Seventh-day Church. It happens in families where, there are certain groupings within the family that some people are excommunicated, and so they're not, related to because they are not part of the inner circle. So that individual only relates to you because you're part of a group. And then, of course, the third orientation is the I-thou, that is a person to person, where I relate to you because of who you are. And whether you have or you don't have, whether you are obnoxious or not, but because you're my friend, because you're my brother, I accept you as you are, despite your defects. Yes, I may try to encourage change in you, but I'm not going to abandon you because of what you're doing, because I am interested in you as a whole person. And that is the orientation that must dominate in our interactions with people, in that we must learn to engender relationships that would stand the test of time. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the person to object. For example, if you have, let's say, the postman still delivers mail here, right? And the postman comes down the road in his uniform. They don't use bicycles anymore, right? They use motorcycles. And so you have an animated conversation with the mailman while he is dispensing the mail and so on, and you sound so friendly. You may even offer him something to eat and that kind of stuff. But as soon as that mailman leaves and you see him late in the day in his home clothes in the checkout counter, are you going to have the same kind of animated conversation with him? Huh? It depends what ordinary circumstances. No, because your relationship with him is limited to the objective in your interaction. So person to object is not always a bad thing. The same thing with the person to group is not always a bad thing. For example, my brother and I, we didn't have a very good relationship growing up. And he would just, because he was older and stronger, and he would just pummel me at home and beating me up. And I am now there, limping from all the blows that he's given me, because I figure, look, this guy doesn't like me at all. But I stepped out from the house, went down the road, and there is a neighborhood bully coming up, facing me. And when he saw me, the bully charged at me. And I thought, well, look, I just got beat up home, and now I'm coming down here, and here's Sparrow, that was his name, coming to finish me off. And as Sparrow is approaching, I heard a voice behind me saying, if you touch him, I'll kill you. When I look back, guess who it was? The same brother just beat me up at home, Because you see, he was demonstrating at home the person to, and he says, look, you just an object there. But when we left the precincts of our home, he saw me as part of his group, his family. And so the orientation changed. So it's not necessarily, a bad, thing, but it is, you have to make the appropriate disclosure. I'm kind of rushing here. All right. Then next one quickly. All right. Now this one, as a matter of fact, I have a complete presentation on it. And, but I'm going to try to proceed here. And this has to do with, in terms of relationship building, how we communicate, at what levels. And there are 5 levels of communication. There's the first one called the cliche level. The second one is the reported speech. The third one is issues and ideas. The fourth one is effective or emotional communication. And the fifth one is intuitive. The funny thing is the order is inverted. So the first one is level 5 rather than level 1. All right, so cliche communication is level 5, even though it's mentioned first. Cliche communication is where, people have, they have what you call surface communication, where you just use, cliches and so on, where the person says, good morning, how are you? And so there are some relationships who survive for years just on those little drop-ins and so on. And believe it or not, there's some people who figure that that is, appropriate, just simple, greeting, but for the most part, there is no interaction. So it's like, good morning, pass the butter, thank you, open the gate, and so on. And basically, you continue for the whole day with those kind of cliches. And believe it or not, there are some people who figure that that's okay because we are talking. Because I know even when my wife and I, we are not talking, we still operate on cliches. So cliche, as far as I'm concerned, is not communicating. Because even when you're not on good terms, you can utter those automatic expressions. All right? So that's level 5. Then level 4 is reported speech. And this is where you are now communicating, you're talking, but it is what you're talking about, in that you're only talking about what you heard happen to this person and that person and so on. And those could be very meaningful and animated conversations. But when you communicate only at that level, you are just surrounding your relationship. It is not affecting your relationship because you're talking about, what other people have said, and, it's basically what we call home, the comments, from the job and so on. And that may seem like it's meaningful, but it is not generally helpful to the development of relationships. So that's the point I want to make. And then, now level three is ideas and issues, and that's a little different. That's now where you become, where you have discussions that are consistent with your value system. So you may have a discussion, let's say, on the Sabbath school lesson. So based on the sermon this morning, when you're going home and you're talking about, things I said wrong and I shouldn't have said that, and this is what it really should mean. And so, there is, a very heavy, philosophical, meaningful discussion of ideas and issues. You can talk about the condition in the country and how things are. You can talk about the condition in the world, like today at lunch, we were there talking about the use of technology and how it has changed, and the positive and the negative connotations. Those are good things to talk about, and they contribute to the health and the development of the relationship. So at level 3 is where things begin to get good, but if you stay there, it is not enough to sustain the health of your relationship, because ideas and issues, having discussions about the lesson study, talking about things that concern you and in the home and so on, they are still talking about things around you, yet closer, but the level at which a relationship thrives, where a relationship really gets off the ground, is at level 2. Affective or emotional. And that is where you're not talking only about ideas and issues. You're not talking only about reported speech, but now where you begin to speak about each other, how you feel about one another, right? Your appreciation for one another. And believe it or not, the only time that some people hear about appreciation for each other is on their anniversary. And this, pastors, is a major problem in marriages, in relationships today, because it is important that even with children, that you sit them down on a regular basis and you ask them how they're feeling. Tell me how you feel about that. All right, so, that communication involves expressing your emotions. It could be positive emotions, it could be negative emotions, but at least you're talking about what's inside of you, and therefore you move the relationship in that direction where it now begins to grow. And so emotional or affective communication is what I call the food of the emotional soul of the marriage or that relationship. And because it is so important, because it is so critical, one of the things that I do, because I know it is not something that comes naturally, it has to be cultivated. And so when I have therapy, when I have to counsel couples and so on, or even individuals, I give them an exercise that every day pour into each other for at least 10 minutes. So you come home and you be very intentional about it. You sit down. Don't do it in the bedroom. Don't do it where you're distracted with television and so on. Is that where you sit each person down and you have them just spending time, just pouring into each other and learn how to develop those expressions that deal with your emotions. And so by practicing that, over time, it becomes a part of your communication that helps to grow the relationship. And you move from cliche, even though sometimes that can work. You move from reported speech, even though it has its place. And then you come to issues and ideas. Yes, that's very good. But when you now reach to the affective levels and emotional levels of communication, that's where the relationship really, really thrives. Now, level 1, what they tell you, what the literature says, is that very few people ever make it to level 1. It is, it's very rare, and it happens mainly from what I've observed, is people who are married for a very, very long time, like over 50 years, and they've been around for each other so much that they can just sit here. And the one person is here and the other person is over there. And you can actually, based on what is happening around, you can actually carry on a conversation without saying a word. Because you are so into each other, you can exactly know and anticipate how your spouse or how your partner is responding to what is being said there and so on. And so when you get in the car, you would be able to confirm that this is exactly what you thought I was thinking. Yes, I was thinking that way. But they're saying that very few couples are so into each other that they can speak at the intuitive level. All right, so those are the levels of communication that are critical or that are important to relationship building. So we've covered perception, we've covered appropriate disclosures, we have covered emotional content, we have covered the orientations of relationships, we have covered, and I'm missing one, and then we've covered the levels of communication. So all of these principles, when properly implemented, they have a positive effect on your on the quality of relationships. So yes, we must pray. Yes, we must ask Jesus Christ to be the center of our relationships. But we also need to be aware that there are principles of human relationships that we must be aware of and that we must practice. So therefore, next slide. This is now where you're going to identify in this scenario. Next slide. Where we're going to read through this scenario. Next slide, please. And this is our concluding exercise. We won't go any further this evening. And by the way, there's another part to this seminar which we can't do this weekend. So if you want at some other time, I can come back and do it. And it has to do with his needs, her needs, how the male-female relationships, how they, what are the pressure points and how to respond to them. But we are not taking them this afternoon. Okay, so we're going to identify whether there's appropriate or inappropriate disclosure in this scenario. We're going to identify any emotional content. We're going to identify an example of a person-to-object relationship, and we're going to see if there are any of the levels of communication that we just covered, if they are present in the scenario. All right? So somebody write, if you can write them down, because we now have to go back to the scenario. So let's go back to the, I'll take a picture of it quickly. Take a picture quickly. All right. So let's go back to the, all right, so we're going to have to go through this again, and then you would identify those four things. Lydia is a 24-year-old SD medical intern. She has just moved into Agapeville to begin her internship. She finds a church where the people appear friendly. However, it took a while for her to make friends. A family, brother and sister Francis, along with their 3 children, Amos 22, Shelley 20, and Portia 11. Lydia eventually warmed up to them. It became easy to discuss most things with Mrs. Francis and even Shelley, but finds it difficult to do so with Amos. Portia could be nice and loving at times, but once she does not get what she wants, it's a different story. Her mom says she does not know what to do with her. Mr. Francis, on the other hand, is a steady guy. He provides for his family and is very versed in the Bible and politics. Even though they have been married for 24 years, Mrs. Francis confides that it is a struggle. Yet he would boast that they have a good relationship. All right, so let's get your reaction. Identify the first one, which is appropriate disclosure. Anybody? All right, you have to speak loud there. All right, right, speak. All right, the first disclosure.
The last one is inappropriate disclosure. The information that the wife shares with the young lady about the struggle, and Mr. Francis also have a blind spot because he think that he have a good relationship.
No, let's deal with the also you do it with disclosure.
Yeah, so he has a blind side because he think he has a good relationship, but the wife thinks otherwise.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? That's interesting. Anyone else? Disclosure, appropriate. Yes, go ahead. All right, okay, another one.
Category may fool me a bit, but this is the one that relates to person to object. And that's the 11-year-old girl.
Right.
Right? Who is not often thing, but when she wants something, you understand? She changes her approach and whatnot.
All right, very good. All right, so I think that's the only one there for the person to object, but the appropriate disclosure. What about, all right, then you look at, she finds a church where people appear friendly. However, it took a while for her to make friends. All right, so there was the tendency where people might have been reaching out to her, and she was not, she was withdrawing because I guess folk were trying too hard, and they were over disclosing. So that's another example. All right, what's the third one? What's the third thing to identify? Huh? All right, what's the second one then? Emotional content. All right, so any examples of an emotional content there that you see coming out of that scenario? All right, I'm going to repeat what you said to get it on the recording. Yes. So you say that it's easy to report to Miss or to relate to Miss Francis, right? But then it continues. It says, but find it difficult to do what? To do so with Amos, because number one, you look at that's why I put the ages there. So she is 24. And Amos is, so they're in the same age range. So what happens, what you see in there is that when there is a high emotional content, people, it's harder for you to kind of, charge into a relationship because of the, the difficulty that, that is there. And so that's the scenario. What's the last one? All right, communication levels. All right, examples of communication levels. Examples? Yes. All right, the wife, what did you? All right, very good. Very good. All right, very good. Then the other one has to do with Mr. Very, very clear, Mr. Francis. All right, even though they have been married for 24 years, where am I? He provides for his family and is very versed in the Bible and politics. So it tells you that that's his preference, in that he operates at the ideas and issues, and the emotional, affective communication is really not there, because it says, even though they have been married for 24 years, Miss Francis still is struggling, but yet he is of the view, because he is comfortable at that level of communication, is very satisfying for him, because that's where his needs are. He thinks everything is fine. So because he is at the level, that's level 3. But Mrs. Francis is saying, I wish that he can move to level 2. All right, very good. So I think that kind of sums it up, and it tells me that you were paying attention, and that I did not entirely waste my time this afternoon. I thank you very much, and I would certainly be very appreciative if we, going out from here, we can find opportunities to apply these principles, in that the script is available. I'm leaving it here with you. It's not copyrighted, but I know you would only use it for appropriate purposes, and I think it also has been recorded, so you can review. Like I said, there's another component to this that deals with couples. And there's a unique biblical rationale for why God chose to make man different from a woman. It's an amazing discovery that I came up with, in that our relationship, male-female relationship, is based on what we call the creation motif. Because when you look at creation, it is based on contrast. So there was what you call, there's unity in diversity, in that you have, when God created the world, is evening and morning, 2 contrasts. And throughout creation, that diversity was part of the perfection. And so when he created male and female, we are diverse, and it was done so that our satisfaction of each other can be accentuated. But sin messed up all of that, both in creation and in human man-woman relation. And so because of that corruption, that's why we have so much discord in male-female relationships. And in understanding the creation motive as to how God, through his son, brought about the harmony of creation again because of salvation. And so he desires the same thing for the husband and wife relationship. It's an amazing discovery that I fell upon. And so on that basis, instead of being upset about how we are different, we need to celebrate our differences and understand the value that God has placed in our differences, where we can achieve unity and diversity. So that's it in a nutshell. But at some other time, if time and opportunities would present themselves, we can have that conversation. Thank you for having me here today back home for this weekend. God bless you.